Thank you all for leaving your warm beds this early today. My name is Kevin de Randamie. I'm 42 years old. And I want to kick off my story with a slightly different interpretation of the word lost. Because obviously, I love language, I love words, and I love the layers that words have. So, not too long ago, I lost my home, lost my company, and I definitely lost my confidence. There was a moment when it was a summer day, and I was pushing my daughter's stroller. She was about 1 year old. In my other hand, I had a really large box with an iMac, right? Computers. What I was doing is I was going to a pawn shop to see if I could sell the iMac, obviously not my daughter, and see if I could get enough to get rent and then perhaps diapers, because I really needed diapers, but I also really needed a home. The only thing left to lose was my fear. This is the thing. When you find yourself in a situation where you feel like you lost everything, then the last thing to lose is your fear. Because most of the things that seem to hinder us tend to be things that live mainly in our imagination. It works. Obviously, I had to look up some really nice quotes, to get your inspiration bubbling. So, I love this one. The sum of wisdom is that time is never lost, that is devoted to work. Now, as a creative, everything I do is connected to work, but I never felt it, I never experienced it as work. I experience it as development. Everything I see, hear, read has a connection because it impacts me. And if I have, let me speak for myself. What my mind does is constantly wonder, oh, that's interesting. Is it something that I could use? Is it something that I could incorporate into something else? I found this quote to be very similar to another quote that I know from a great poet called DMX. But that turned out to be a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. So perhaps DMX had read Nietzsche. I'm going to say it like he said it. DMX, that is, not Nietzsche. To live is to suffer, but to survive is to find meaning within the suffering. Anybody knows DMX? There you go. Did I do him? Yeah? Okay. I did him justice a little bit? Okay. To me, they relate to each other. Because this also says it's not as much about the experience in and of itself. It's about your interpretation of the experience. We're going back to 1975. In 1975, in a country far, far, far away from here, there was a party. The country celebrated its independence from the Dutch colonizers, or partners. Now, you can't really see it well, but these are old people dressed up in obviously different clothing. And this was the event that kicked off the chain of events that put me here today. My parents both were born in Suriname. My dad was in the army. When Suriname became independent, there was an influx of people who had basically to make a choice. Am I going to stay here or am I going to go to Holland now that I still can? Because you don't know what the future is going to bring. So my father and mother came to the Netherlands. This was the winter of 1975. Yeah, William. And this was the winter of 1976. My mother was quite young at the time. She was about 20. Followed this guy that she had met, who was quite a popular guy because he turned out to have had different girlfriends that picked her to come with him. Found herself in a city called Roermond. Looked outside and thought, the fuck am I doing here? Matter of fact, her being there was a true experience of being lost. Because you have to imagine, you're young, you're a black woman in Roermond, and your husband is in the army. Those are not 9 to 5 hours. So you spend a lot of time by yourself. Luckily, they got together just often enough to have me. So 1977 was a year, a glorious year. Anybody here from 77? I'm the only one. I feel special already. So obviously, this is a glorious and momentous occasion. Now, not only were my father and mother happy, my mother was especially happy because she was not alone anymore if my dad was off to the army. However, there was this thing called white people that still made her feel like she didn't belong. So, have you gotten used to wearing clothes? Was something that she has actually heard as a question in the Netherlands because people had no idea where she was from. Now, mind you, this is not about being mean or being harsh. Let's assume that these are loving people who are genuinely interested in seeing this black lady with this baby.
Just a bit stupid.
Ill-informed.
Yeah, kind of.
Right? So, why I want to highlight this is because it kind of paints the picture for what would be a basically like a red thread throughout life. Why? However accustomed we've gotten to being in the Netherlands, there was always this notion of we are here, but you know, my dad's intention was to come to the Netherlands, get an education, work himself, start his career in Holland, and then go back. That last part never happened. So both my father and my mother, and having had me, always had this sense of being aware that you're not necessarily where you need to be. Always checking, always making sure that it was acceptable. There was this thing where my parents, even when I had more siblings, there was this thing where my parents made a point of keeping us from playing outside on Sundays. Why? Because the sound of a bouncing ball might disturb the Sunday quiet that the neighbors might want to embrace. Then I went to school. Well, going to school is usually it's actually always a joyous occasion because lots of new friends, new people. You play a lot. There's lots of excitement, and so it was for me. Um, and then, yet, for instance, when we would see a commercial about, let's say, UNICEF, like we had a project about poverty in Africa, and there was this video of kids in, let's say, Uganda, and then saw them, and they had the edema bellies, and then the flies on the, those typical things that people show you to make sure you give money. And then I get this look from anybody like, "Has that got something to do with you?" Now, I didn't feel abandoned at all. I had friends. It was nice. There was a really warm connection that I felt between teachers, kids, etc. But every now and then, there was this idea, this trigger that said, "But mind you, are you in the right place?" Luckily, quite explicit. Who knows where you find this sticker? Hip hop albums. And all other albums with explicit lyrics. But yes, hip hop albums. I discovered music. I discovered hip hop. Now, it wasn't necessarily this particular sticker that drew me to music, but it really gave me a sense of self, a sense of identity. I really felt like I had a beacon, something to correct course on. Because there was a thing where, even though obviously I had always been a part of my family, which now included 6 of us, 2 parents, 4 kids, we always were a family unit. However, I still felt like I didn't belong, even in the family unit. Why? Because my parents had coding in them that didn't really necessarily rhyme with what I felt was needed in my environment. Their ideas about how to behave in public didn't necessarily align with mine. So obviously this causes a little friction, that and puberty. So this kind of makes sense of it all. This kind of gave me like a compass. This kind of showed me a way back to a part of me that really made sense. Completely, even if it was completely contrary to what my surroundings were telling me. So hip hop, in essence, and I got to say, I kind of learned English from hip hop because I would listen to back then you had cassette tapes, which is like, anyway. So what I would do is I would play a song and then pause it, then rewind it all the way back, and then pause it after every sentence and then write down the sentence. And then when I had it, I would rap the entire thing. That's why to this day I still know songs from back then in some kind of effed up English because my English wasn't that good. But that's how I learned the songs. So hip hop made me feel from this more like this. It made me feel like there was a group of people around me who had a lot in common with me. Now, obviously, this is not necessarily about people of color versus white people. This is far more about culture than it is about ethnicity. I think that's the beauty of, for instance, hip hop, that it is encoded in a lot of us. Well, some of us here. That's a lot of us. We've all been exposed to it. And to some, it really became a part of our lives. So this is what I had now. Like I felt like there was a community that belonged, that didn't care about where I was from, that didn't care about where I was going, that just cared about who I was. Well, this was a beautiful thing for me personally, because the whole sense of feeling um, loss is probably too strong a word, but I'm going to say abandoned, feeling like you're wandering around in solitude. Now was kind of like channeled. When hip hop found me, and mind you, for contrast, we were living in Atarda. Anybody knows where Atarda is? That's how famous it is. Atarda is a small city. Not a city. It's a small village between Amersfoort and Zwolle. Yes, and it's probably got, I'm going to guess, 4 churches and more cows than inhabitants. Right? It's very rural and very far away from any urban life. That's where I found hip hop. And that's why I say hip hop found me. So, having gotten in contact with the culture, I started to basically become a part of it more and more. You know, from writing down the lyrics from the tapes that I got, that I recorded from the radio, I now started to write my own lyrics. I still know one of my first lyrics. They were very, very anti the system, because I needed to go to church every Sunday, and I wasn't feeling that. And I found church to be one hypocritical bunch of people. Now I go to church every Sunday, which is funny. But it gave me a way out, and I decided, you know what, I should take this more seriously. So I read a book called All You Need to Know About Music Business. And then, since I knew everything there was to know about music business, because that's what the title said, I decided I'm going to record my own album and release it. So here I was, all entrepreneurial, because I got an investor for €2,500. And I recorded my first album on my own label. Now, I come from a family and surroundings of people who got record deals, like they got girlfriends. And I decided that I would really rather find out for myself what and how to launch my ideas into the world, my concepts into the world, than be signed. And I think it has a lot to do, obviously at that point I wasn't that conscious, but looking back, I think it had a lot to do with having come from a family of immigrants who then showed me the way they saw the world, me disagreeing and finding my own way. I think that had a lot to do with it, because signing your work over to a company means that they then have a lot of control about where you go. So I figured, no, I'd rather take a little longer and take the punches and the blows that will no doubt follow my release, than hand it over and basically give away that opportunity for development. I'd rather suffer a bit and then give it meaning after that. So I did another album and a third one, and then I was like, I made it. I figured, this is it. I'm good now. I am a professional rapper from Atarda. But then this happened. Who here has had debt? I think everybody here has debt. You may not be consciously aware of it. Mortgages, credit cards, you name it. Debt is how our society works. My parents, my mother once told me, I don't know how you sleep at night. If I had your debt, I couldn't sleep. It's one of those other this ideas that she was brought up with. Very accurate. I mean, it's correct. You know, you should avoid, if you can, to be in debt. However, debt as a private person works completely different from having debt as a company. Companies could use debt to grow the company. However, $250,000 is a whole different type of fruitcake. So, what happened naturally is that life kind of stopped. The way I got to this amount of debt is because once I started making music, I figured, cool, you know, we're doing it, we're working, and I started to basically invest in my label. But in 2010, there was a certain Mr. Zelstra who decided that culture subsidies weren't necessary anymore. And he cut that by, I think, 60% or something like that. Now, at that point, I didn't get subsidies, so I thought I could care less. But then I found out who did get subsidies. That turned out to be everybody, especially festivals. Festivals, in turn, started to book safe artists, meaning artists that you know draw a certain type of crowd. We were a little too exotic, so that summer, 0.0 bookings for the entire label. Now, to anybody who's not familiar with music, the summer is basically where you could make about 70-80% of your annual revenue because of all the festivals. So to not have any bookings in the summer is basically a gunshot to the head. And that gunshot is the one I got. Then that doesn't add up to $250,000 debt. However, add to that a very immature way of bookkeeping, not knowing how to properly do that, missing the moments when you need to file your taxes. Then tax revenue service starts to basically think up what you should be paying, and then you get there quite easily. So at this point, I was a semi-famous rapper with $250,000 debt, and on top of that, I had a relationship which broke off, and then I had a baby. I lived in an abandoned office space, anti-squatting type of arrangement, which was beautiful when I had money. But when I didn't have money, it became like a very impoverished situation. However, and this is my blessing, there was not a moment that I did not know where I wanted to go. I understood that all of the steps that had gotten me there were basically necessary steps. I didn't know where it would end up, but I did know that everything that I had gone through made some type of sense somewhere. However, if you're talking about feeling lost, $250,000 debt will definitely get you there. There was a moment when I was in a meeting, and somebody that I didn't even really know very well asked me how I was doing, and I told him, well, it's okay. I'm kind of looking for a house right now. He said, oh, really? Then he did this. I got one in Rotterdam. And then he went into his bag and he got a contract. Turned out he had intended that house for a girlfriend of his who had given him grief and then forfeited the house, and then it became available to me. So that night, I moved to Rotterdam. Because what you gonna do? Not go to Rotterdam. So I went to Rotterdam. At that point, I still had my car, but obviously I needed to pay rent and I didn't have an income, so I needed to sell my car. At the same time, I had a 1-year-old. So I had an empty home. I sold the car for a little bit of furniture. And then I was new in Rotterdam. I didn't have any family in Rotterdam. I remember there was a moment where I was sitting on the floor, because there was no furniture yet. Sitting on the floor, and my daughter was with me. She was crawling around, playing with some stuffed animal. And I just broke down. There was not a moment before that where I felt as such a failure. Completely contrast to my public persona, which, was like a rapper and doing all sorts of cool stuff. I started a spoken word platform. I did. I was seen on big stages, and I felt like a complete fuck up. And that's the moment where I thought, not even I thought, where I had to come to terms with, okay, what is the core of it all? What is the core of it all? Where's the value in all of this? And I think I found it. Because I thought it was rap, but I figured no, it wasn't. And what my daughter did for me, like the way she mirrors, like the type of mirror she is to me, I thought, this is it, this, fatherhood, this is it. But then even that wasn't it. I figured there's one thing that's gonna get me back on track. And that's facing the demon. And the demon, in this case, was my dad. So I decided to work until my value, what I then perceived to be a monetary thing, exceeded my dad. So I started writing, reading a lot about, okay, so what, of all the lessons that I have, what is the core of it? What is the thing that's going to put me back on a track on where I'm supposed to go? And then I figured it was my creativity. The one constant in all of the things that I did was my creativity. The minute I realized that it wasn't about necessarily what I do, but what I can cause to happen, which is a big difference, that put me back on track. So the spoken word thing I did became a foundation unto itself. The lessons that I'd learned from working in music became a school. The network I had became a company. I started to advise the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Fontis, and I even did work for Heineken and Intel. All based on the thing that I thought that I kind of taken for granted. Because I was focused on being out there as the rapper, as an artist, etc. Whereas all I needed to do was get back to the core essence of it. And to me, the core essence of it was, or still is, indeed, the creativity. Anybody here creative? I hope so. It's Creative Mornings. So. In closing, I think Claudia asked me for a quote for this session. And my quote would be, "You are not lost as long as you know where you're going, regardless of what the circumstances may look like, regardless of what people tell you, as long as you know what the result should be." No worries. What your results should be of the work you do now, as long as that's clear to you, you are not lost. You're just finding meaning within the suffering. This was my takeaway. Creativity has the unique property that you don't need anything for it to work. You can create value out of thin air. If you think about magicians, right? Magic. What is magic? Who could give me a definition? What is magic?
Make you create something out of nothing, like a rabbit from the hat.
Yeah. I'd say the instantaneous creation from something out of nothing. Now, if you take away the time, right? If you take away the instantaneous, isn't that exactly what we do? Right? If you take away the time that it takes to get from there to there, isn't that the definition of magic? Doesn't that then make us 21st century magicians? Everything is creation. So to me, finding my way back was this realization. If we can create images, events, experiences, then why not life?